here. This time, building episode first. Actually, I already shot the intro for the non-building portion of it and then had so little conflict that I had no content other than the building content. So, only building. And I think this will be my last building episode of the Live with Neater series. I think this is the last thing I really need. There are other things I could build for it, but I really want to get back to some of the more permanent additions to my fleet. There's a bunch of other stuff that I want to build, stuff that I want to finish, that sort of thing. So I'm probably going to build this as my last ship using the railguns that I showed off the last time, and then just sort of crush the enemies with them, hopefully. I mean, we'll see if it actually happens or not. And I should have some more time now because I've finished my taxes. And as they say, there are only two things that are for certain. Since I've already finished my taxes, I am returning to Neater for the other thing. So usually I start with weapons first on ships. You don't have to, it's just how I'm used to doing it, so I kind of have an eyeball for how big I want the ship to be for a certain size gun. Other people, have a certain size gun they want for a certain size ship, but I prefer the gun first. I mess up the turret wells, so yeah, it's actually clipping into the turret, which I do figure out before it gets too late, but I do a little bit more building of the turret well first. And, I mean, not really standardized construction techniques for me or anything, because the ship is literally made out of cardboard. There's only so much I can do for it. But I am hoping that bringing high-powered railguns, it will help me destroy things before I get destroyed. As they say, cannons are the last argument of kings, but, well, railguns are the last argument of Depthians. So anyway, this is when I realized my mistake. You can see some of these beams clip into the turret a little bit. So I go and delete them and start over again. And I do it the way that I should have the first time. I don't know. A case of the Mondays or whatever. I didn't film this on Monday, but you can have Mondays no matter what day it is. And it was when I mirrored it that it messed up, despite the weird. And when I say mirrored, I mean by spinning it around with the prefab. Despite the weird way that I built the turret ring under the deck where I couldn't see it, I did actually match everything up when I was building over it. It was just when I flipped it around with the prefab. Anyway, not sure how much of a difference all this armor on the turret's gonna make. Like, the armor is actually cardboard. Actually, as we'll find out at the end, the turret is probably the worst armored portion of this entire vehicle. Oh well. It's going to be very, very cursed, but I think still sufficiently effective to get me through in easy mode playthrough. Hopefully. At least in some numbers. One of the issues is keeping, not using too much wood, right? I don't want to have the volume so high that I have to spawn these things in one at a time. Volume is the main limitation of wood. You can have enough wood armor that it's effective against railguns, because wood is effective just health to hit points to cost ratio against high armor piercing kinetic weapons. But the amount of it that you need to actually stop a railgun shell is just so prohibitively high that it doesn't matter if it's cost effective or not if you can't actually spawn in that much wood. So now I'm putting in some batteries, I'm going to put in an engine, ammo, that kind of stuff. Oh, and a lot of materials. A lot of materials. I'm sort of, going half one way, half the other, and then just decide we're having all the materials. But it's because I forgot how much energy these guns actually draw. So I'm just tossing down the bare minimum for it to tell me that. Shells, ammo, that sort of stuff. And then I'll put the power plant down once I figure that out. Oh, and, I spent all that time building this engine. Yeah, this is the only one of these engines that I'm putting on this boat. I get a little lazy. I don't feel like actually piping all the pipes through. So I use a supercharger engine. But, good exercise. Good content or something, I don't know. I also only put one shell type. The correct thing to do would probably be to mix APHE and AP EMP. Oddly, AP&P probably won't be as good against the easy mode designs that will just have more protection against it from just having a larger percentage low quality armor. But regardless, AP-EMP is really good. Because, I think I'm typing some calculations in here to figure out how much engine I actually need, or maybe I hadn't gotten that far yet and I was just pausing and unpausing. Anyway, at some point I do that. But maybe I do place a second one. I thought I only placed one. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. I have second thoughts about my engines, and, sometimes you just need more power. So, we've got all of the engines now. I realized that I wasn't going to be able to get enough engines between the material storage. And I could have spread the material storage further out, but I also was thinking about, I'm not going to want to pipe all of these anyway, so I just spammed a ton of engines. And since the engines are sort of providing me protection against the inner components, and they have virtually no armor protecting them, there needs to be an excessive quantity of them because they're going to get damaged in combat. The other thing is, I don't bother to build a double hull on this ship, because if it gets hit by a torpedo, especially close to the center where the squishy things are, there is basically no amount of wood that would stop a torpedo from just shredding everything inside. Kind of lazy way of building an AI compartment. It's also pretty heavy on the processing power. I was still thinking that I might have some missiles guided with GPP, remote guidance missiles. So here I'm looking at the amount of ammo that I need, and I'm sort of bringing it down closer to the minimum. I will still wind up needing more than the minimum because even though I don't put anti-missile missiles, I do put anti-torpedoes on this boat because the lambs that I put on this, doesn't shoot into the water that well. And the ubiquitous CIWS that I put everywhere on this fleet, like on almost every single vehicle. I think every single vehicle since I built it does not show up on this vehicle. Here is actually, there was a pause where I was thinking about as well if I was actually going to put the CIWS on it. And I decided not to. I just put, other vehicles in the fleet with CIWS. I was also originally intending this thing to have 4 turrets. It was going to be substantially more expensive. Then I decided that I was basically just going to have, or even maybe even cut the size down to 1/3 of the original plan for the ship and just have more of them in a fight. One of the potential issues with having one of these that's too large is that it might get crippled by a single shot. And I kind of could avoid that, but the way to avoid that would basically just be building 3 ships in a trench coat. Which is kind of what a lot of my large designs are, right? Like, that's how you achieve redundancy. Because, if you kill one of the ships in the trench coat, the other 2 can still wear the trench coat, just it's a little bit looser. So, bunch of piles of ammo. So there's a number of things that I could have named this that might have been better. I sort of named it the Paper Tiger, but little bit of a pun, but still not the best joke. So now I go for what's probably the real defensive system on the ship, especially against easy gamecraft that probably won't have that much firepower. And it's a fairly hefty lambs. I'm not really paying enough attention to the component directions. Partially that's not even me not paying attention to them, it's just because I hadn't been playing that much for a while, so I forgot which way all the laser components stick onto each other. And, trial and error does get you there eventually. So, eventually I get all these stuck on in the right direction. And fortunately, lambs isn't that hard to build. So, yeah, I put the wrong block there. It takes me a little while to figure that out. Like, why isn't flipping these doing anything? Oh, right. So, put these down. I actually forget that you can't connect them like that. I kind of would think that you'd be able to. I realize that the other ones are probably also connected incorrectly. Now I'm realizing that you can't connect multiple systems through the side like that, so doing that, everything's connected wrong. But, eventually it's all connected, it's all good. Yeah, to put the lambs nodes on. I do have laser turrets that I could use for offensive power already on the Incredible Husk, but I don't remember if I have those saved anywhere. I don't think I do is the problem, because I don't think I ever spawned it. I put one on both sides, so I must have it saved somewhere, actually. For a second, I thought I never spawned it into the designer mode to copy the sub-objects, because I have to. It's the one thing I'll go into the designer mode for. But, no, I must have spawned it into the designer mode, copied the sub-object, then gone back into the campaign. Yeah, so this is how to armor up your ammo storage, in case you've ever wondered. I guarantee you'll never have any problems ever again if you ammo them like this, or armor them like this. So one of the things that I'm hoping for is, because of the incredible material storage amount on this, that I'll be able to run it at very low materials loads like 10% or less, and hopefully that'll decrease the damage done by the ammo when it blows sufficiently, as well as the actual explosion radius sufficiently that they won't chain react. I have no idea if they will or not, though. I'm almost 100% certain that if I run it at even a reasonable material load, like 25 to 30%, it'll chain react. We'll find out, though. Making it relatively boat-shaped, it's not really going to be a canoe. No, it looks like it's going to shape up to be a canoe at first, but I don't copy the front onto the back. The back is just kind of square. I realized that I hadn't closed in the top, which is why my fill command wasn't working. 3 layers of wooden armor. If it's good enough for the Deepwater Guard, it's good enough for me. I'm not trying to finish that layer, I'm just trying to cover the top of the ammo so that I don't have my ammo exposed. I'm shy that way. Even if it doesn't do anything, it's like kind of like pajamas. Actually, with all of that engine power sort of stacked on the sides, this is probably my most heavily armored ship in this campaign so far. The actual armor percentage is, of course, incredibly low in terms of cost, but all the material storage on the side, as well as all of that engine power, will hopefully give it some survivability, as long as it takes shots onto the side rather than the top. I'm figuring out how far I have to go back to get it to an even 4 ratio. I wind up with a little bit of space in the back, which I use to spread my torpedo defenses around in. This actually turns into a fairly fast ship, because it's got a lot of engine power, so I just kind of stick a lot of steam props on the back. I mean, so vaguely canoey, but not quite borderwise levels of canoe. He always makes the excuse that, ships are just kind of canoes because canoes work well. But the reason that everyone calls his ships canoes is because they're so prismatic. Which canoes aren't really that prismatic. But it's still why his get called canoes. And this ship is incredibly prismatic. I decided to build the superstructure. And really, so superstructure, I believe, would mean super as in above. And as far as I can tell, structure just means a thing. And this is certainly a thing, and it is certainly above. And not just a little above, right? I've been using elevated chairs in the past, but I've gotten used to that. I've gotten acclimated to the elevated chair, and it no longer feels elevated. So we have to go higher. I don't really have a plan at the moment while I'm doing this. really kind of going in the direction of abstract art. I think I'm really just going back to my visits to the ICSA or whatever. Of course, how much of that do I actually remember other than its name? Very, very little. I lived very close to it for a while, but that was entirely during COVID, so I never went in while I lived there. So, uh, haven't been in since I was a little kid. Beautiful, beautiful. I know what you're thinking. This is the best superstructure you've ever seen. Have to toss detection on it, of course. So this is definitely going for a no armor is best armor concept. Flak is going to ruin the superstructure's day. Anything that has to hit to explode will hopefully just pass right through. But unfortunately, a lot of enemies, especially easier difficulty ones, actually have flak. Which is really unfortunate for me because everything I make is made out of wood, which is the only thing that flak actually does anything to. If you build out of anything else, you can just completely ignore flak damage, and it's might as well just not exist, which is part of what makes a lot of the easier enemy designs so easy. Part of it is also because the small enemy designs are built really badly, for the most part, and it's kind of hard to make small vehicles that are effective. So, right, like, all the low difficulty enemies are just the small ones. If you sort enemies by difficulty, it's basically the same as sorting them by size, with the exception being the Exodine. The Exodine being the terror of easy difficulty campaigns. It does deserve to be an easier difficulty than some of the other Lightning Hood's vehicles that are in like a similar class to it, cost-wise. But as far as I'm concerned, it's terrifying compared to like every other easier difficulty craft. And part of it is really because of its size. Especially because the AI doesn't group fleets up that well, right? You could make a fleet of smaller vehicles that are efficient, like mini Exodines that are more efficient, and if they threw 700,000 materials of them at you at the same time incredibly early in the game, well, yes, it would still be scary. I'm adding some materials containers for ballast reasons right now. I'm not really taking any care about how these work as far as the relative position to vulnerable components. I'm just trimming out the boat a little bit. I would like it to ride even lower in the water, but that doesn't really seem to be much of an option. So I just sort of deal with it the way it is, and I can't just toss more weight in the stern because, well, it's gonna lean back pretty hard. Put the propellers as high as I can put them and still have them be underwater, which also is kind of as low as I can put them and still have them in the boat hole. Which does mean that this could have some of the same problems as we saw when I was making the Pulley Warrior, where it does front flips. Something to point out is that like the power to weight ratio of a boat is kind of flat. Like if you build the boat with the same ratio of things that drive it, your power to weight ratio is going to be fixed, which means your power will increase linearly with the size of your boat. The moment of inertia, so like how fast your boat flips, is going to increase with the square of the length of your boat. And it depends on how beamy you get, right? Because like if you just build your boat super fat, you know, the length isn't going to scale linearly with how fat, with like how much your boat weighs. Is actually going to scale as the cube root. But for me, I tend to make my boats basically, they get longer aspect ratios. They get way longer as they get bigger, and the power to weight ratio probably goes down a little bit as well because the relative drag goes down. So because of the long length, the long moment of inertia around the high moment of inertia around that axis, probably the slightly lower power to weight required to get the same velocity. They don't have the same dynamics. They don't pop wheelies as easily, that sort of thing. Although I suppose if you did actually just scale the boat up linearly in all directions, it would probably pop wheelies even easier. Whatever you would think about hearing things like, oh, things don't scale well because of the square cubed law, that's entirely a structural integrity issue that or at least that's mostly a structural integrity issue. It's potentially even a little bit worse than it sounds, but that's all about the fact that how strong something is, like your bones, mostly scales with the cross-sectional area. That's it's true and not true, but and that cross-sectional area doesn't scale up as fast as your weight does, unfortunately. But those dynamics don't really translate well into from the depths because from the depths has no structural integrity. There's also other issues, right? If you start to get really long, you start to move from issues where like the bone's actually breaking to buckling issues. And buckling has different rules, and they're even less favorable, actually, believe it or not. Putting some lambs on the superstructure, too. I have to have defenses as well. And then I'm deciding that I want some offensive firepower, but I don't actually want to put turrets on. Yeah, I know. I think I never built a secondary AI, so these just all go on the main AI. And I'm gonna have to rely on things like the Incredible Husks to kill the Twin Guard drones. If there's another big vehicle, because these are just going to go for large vehicles. I do the usual thing of setting these to hold fire below about 90% energy, so that if I'm using the lambs, so I'm using the lambs primarily defensively, and any of these boats that aren't being shot at, we'll use the lasers offensively. They're not very good lasers at long range. I built them very short so that they'll have a very wide field of fire, so I don't really have to put them on a turret. These combined with the ones pointing upwards basically cover an entire cylinder around the boat. You know, ideally these would be on some anti-aircraft. Oh yeah, this is where I put the anti-air ones, because I don't want it shooting the superstructure, so instead of putting it in the wooden box, I just put it up here. I figure it has about the same chance of getting shot off anyway. I also intentionally don't have a hold fire on the vertical ones, so that if I have swarmcraft that get really close to me, or nukes, or that sort of thing, they will always get shot at by the upwards firing lasers. And now I'm just testing dynamics a little bit. You know, I've still got my thrust and steering a little too low. It's not horrible, though, right? And it was really the best I could do. And it's sort of what gets this ship-like effect. A lot of my From the Depths vehicles have very flat steering and that sort of stuff. They don't heel at all. This one heels like a ship does. because it's actually riding high in the water like an actual seaworthy vessel. It's not super duper low like a monitor where you could actually make them have those sorts of dynamics. So now I'm just testing to make sure that my energy regenerates quickly enough. So I'm just switching more of my engines to battery power to make sure that it'll replenish quickly enough. Doing a few more testing, still have a lot of excess engine power, not quite enough battery power. Go back and adjust that again. It turns out I wasn't as excessive on engine power as I really thought. Given how much stuff I spammed out. I did the math, so like maybe I knew that I wasn't being super duper excessive. But anyway, basically works. And that's all for this episode. Hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope to see you in the future.